Hi, I'm Isobel, and today I'm doing a history talk for the Women on Tap Festival 2020. I'll be discussing the roles of women within pubs in the 19th to the early 20th century. Before I begin, I just want to give you a little bit of background on the original brewsters, the 16th century alewives. Whilst women's involvement within beer is seemingly modern, women were the original brewers. However, with their success also brought backlash. The image of the rich originated from the image of the alewives. So how did the alewives begin this archetype of the witch? Alewives would often wear long hats in public in order to draw attention and gain more custom. They'd also keep cats in their storehouses in order to get rid of pesky rodents. And the broomstick? Well, alewives would have broomsticks on the outside of their stores in order to indicate that they had more ale for sale. But why did these women that were providing such a useful service become deemed as these witches? As with any success within a female-dominated industry, brought propaganda of satire in order to diminish their accomplishments. So how did this early depiction of women in the drinks industry therefore affect how women occupied public houses in the 19th and early 20th century? In the 19th century, the pubs were the territory of the working class. Age and sex didn't really matter, but later this changed. Historians recognise the spaces as a masculine republic, not only because men would occupy them, but because the way these spaces were used as masculine space. This would be done by buying rounds, spitting out tobacco, fraternising with barmaids, and just general drunken behaviour. The aesthetic of the pub was also famously masculine, with the toilets being famously disgusting and unhygienic. However, most working class women saw through this and didn't really mind. Whilst most working class women were able to enter these establishments, there were certain boundaries that were put in place. Age, marital status, and income were huge factors in whether or not women were able to enter these spaces. Young, unmarried women would rarely enter the pub alone. This was just in case they were mistaken for prostitutes, which was quite often the case. Whereas middle-aged and older women that were married were able to enter these spaces. The more poverty-stricken would enter within large groups of one another and drink during the week, whereas those from more middle-class backgrounds would come in with their husbands during the weekend. Children and babies often accompanied their mothers to the pubs. However, this brought in concerns over neglect, and later led to the ban of children within pubs in the early 20th century. As can be seen in this picture from the Welcome collection, titled "The Drunkard's Children," this depicts the neglectful parents within a gin shop in the 19th century. Children can be seen helping themselves to alcohol, and even on the far right, a woman is shown feeding gin to a baby. In 1880, over a third of those that were visiting the pubs were women. In the East End of London, Monday was even recognised as Ladies' Day. Some pubs there even had special bars purely for women. The East End pubs where women patronised were called the cowsheds as an epithet for these women. Similarly, cowshed or duck pen were nicknames in Birmingham for the rooms that older women would sit in to stay away from their husbands in the pub. There was a lot of contradiction about women's involvement in pubs. Some believed that it was increasing by the end of the 19th century, whereas some felt the opposite. So why was there this confusion? Well, this came down to the types of women that were visiting these areas. Whilst the working class women have always visited because they were less bothered about the fact it was a boys' club, middle-class women were beginning to visit when they made women's own spaces for them, especially in the East End of London. Therefore, when it came to respectability within pubs, this was only referred to within women rather than men. With the divide in sexes going to the pubs, this brought in issues about household income and how it was spent in these areas. There were many cases of women that made arrangements with obliging publicans over how much money their husbands could spend within their establishments. In some cases, women would actually drag their husbands out of the pubs themselves. When it came to working in the pubs, barmaids often came from respected labouring families, whereas in Scotland, women were banned from working completely. The number of barmaids differed in each region. In Portsmouth, it was stated that only 10% of barmaids worked in the trade, whereas in Plymouth, there are about 90 barmaids employed in about 600 public houses. However, in the north, they're a bit stricter about employing barmaids, particularly in the rough houses, though many argued that barmaids were better at sorting out rowdy customers than barmen. Many licensed spittlers preferred women as bar attendants. As one employer noted, women were better attendants than men. They're not as expensive, they're not so clumsy, They're not so wasteful, and they don't break so many things as men. Men are liable to drink, men are liable to other vices, such as betting and things that are a danger in that occupation. It is believed that there is a certain amount of mystery behind the name of the barmaid. This came from the idea that being a barmaid was a theatrical event, with the bar as its stage, making her both conspicuous and seductive. Many contemporaries also commented on the good looks of barmaids. Barmaids in London in the 1860s were described as of superior aspect, quiet young women dressed in ladylike fashion, who could pour gin out as fast as they could. In other cases, there were barmaids contests in the 1860s that provided steady publicity for them at the time. The 20th century brought in new legislation regarding drinking habits in Britain. One of the defining moments that changed the women's place in the pub was the law introduced in 1908 that banned children from the pubs. With gender roles deeming that the mother was to look after the children, women could no longer go to the pub as a leisurely pursuit. Before this, women would bring children to the pubs with them in large groups of the same sex. Whilst often women would inherit pubs from their husbands or their fathers, for the working class women in the 20th century, pub work was much more appealing than domestic work. This was particularly influenced by the increase of bar work available in hotels. The work was not physically strenuous, the work environment was attractive, and the wages were marginally higher than domestic servants. Most barmaids expected to more than double their wages from gratuities or gifts. After the outbreak of World War I, the Defence of the Realm Act was passed by Parliament in 1914. One section of the Act concerned the hours that pubs could serve alcohol. It was believed that alcohol could affect the war effort. This restricted opening hours from 12 till 20 to 3 and 6:30 until 10:30. This meant 2/3 of the old drinking regime had just disappeared. This new legislation in Britain brought this fear that we were following America's footsteps in Prohibition, which was the banning of selling alcohol in America between 1920 and 1933. The war, however, created a wider base of female pub patrons, specifically young upper working class and middle class women who were no longer bound to their wifely duties. These factors combined brought on a new quest to improve public houses in the 1920s and 1930s, which radically redesigned the pub. This redesign in the 1920s brought a more sophisticated image of the barmaid. As this picture represents a new wave sophisticated barmaid serving a working class barmaid from the 19th century. The entry of women on a large scale into licensed houses during and after World War I laid the foundation for the greater freedom to drink publicly in the post-1945 era. So that's the end of my talk today. On Friday we have Annabelle Smith doing a talk on women in beer in World War II. Really looking forward to that along with the rest of the festival. Big thank you to Rachel and Andrew for organising everything, and we're still raising money for Refuge, so I'll pop that in the link below. Thank you very much.